Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the Holocaust Center's Director of Education. We remember and recognize that the Holocaust Center in Seattle sits on the land of the Duwamish Nation. They are the indigenous people of metropolitan Seattle, having lived here as long ago as 115,000 years. During the month of February, the Holocaust Center is raising support for our new book-by-book small grants program. We know that teachers often don't have the resources they need to teach about the Holocaust. The book-by-book program provides small grants up to $500 to Washington State public school teachers who need to purchase books for their students. Thanks to the generous support of Kate Boris Brown and Greg Brown, donations made to the book-by-book program this month will be matched dollar for dollar. We are almost at the end of the month and we have $1,000 left of the match, and you can help us get there. I'm excited to let you know that we have already awarded our first round of grants. Teacher Irene at Interagency, a school for kids in detention, already received the funds and wasted no time purchasing a classroom set of the graphic novel Mouse. In addition to Elaine, the following teachers received small grants this past month. Ryan and Michael Anderson Elementary on the Fairchild Air Force Base to purchase a selection of books for their library to be used by the teachers. 4 teachers at Harbor Ridge Middle School in Gig Harbor who are creating classroom book sets. JC at Lake Roosevelt Elementary on the Colville Indian Reservation to purchase copies of the book Whitebird. And Hillary at Washougal High School, the head librarian, will be creating classroom sets of books on the Holocaust, not only for her school, but also to be used by others in their district. We will be reviewing grant proposals every month and are preparing to award another round of teachers after March 1st. If you donate today, your gift can go twice as far. This means more students have resources to learn about this critical subject. To donate, you can check out the link in our chat or go to our website, holocaustcenterseattle.org. I'd like to invite you to visit the Holocaust Center, which is now open on Sundays. Reserve a time slot and bring a friend or a relative to see our exhibit, Finding Light in the Darkness. When you visit, please look up as you enter the building. In the entryway to the Holocaust Center for Humanities Museum, there is a quote above the door that reads, "You must understand that I did not become a resistance fighter all at once. One's first steps are always small. I had begun by hiding food under a fence." Irene Opdyke was a force of a woman, recognized later in life by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations for her heroic actions of saving people in Poland during the Holocaust. Like thousands of others, I read her memoir in my hands and was awed and inspired by this remarkable story. It wasn't until many years later that I learned that Irene's daughter, Jeannie, lived right here in Washington State. Inspiring like her mother, Jeannie conveys her mother's message of love and determination to students and audiences around the world. Jeannie Opdyke Smith is a recipient of the 2015 Civil Rights Award given by the Anti-Defamation League. She resides with her husband, Gary, and is the mother of 3, a foster parent of 60, she told me yesterday, a grandmother of 5, and a surrogate mother to dozens more. I want to thank our partners on this week's program, the Polish Home Association, Polish Studies Endowment Committee at the University of Washington, the Anti-Defamation League of the Pacific Northwest, and Intiman Theater. Jeannie will take questions at the end of the program. Please type in your questions at any time in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Jeannie, thank you so much for being with us today. It's always an honor to have you as part of our programming, and I will turn it over to you.
Hi, can you see me? Are we there? All right. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so used to speaking to audiences live, and so this is going to be the next best thing. And for me to be able to do it comfortably, I just want to invite you all into my house sitting here so that I can share Mom with you. My mom was born in Poland She was the oldest of 5 beautiful sisters, she used to say. My mom's father was an architect. He was busy planning and building and sketching, and my mom's mom was a homemaker. I grew up hearing a lot of fun stories about my mom. This mom was the oldest there, and it all went down to the smallest. But when my mom graduated high school, her absolute dream was to become a nurse. And so her parents sent her off to nursing school. She'd never even been away from home before, so it was exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time. Mom was only at school a week, maybe 10 days, when one morning, what had been a sunny day turned dark because there was airplanes flying all over. Without any warning, Hitler had invaded Poland, and all communication was cut off at that point. Mom couldn't call home to find out if her family was all right, and they couldn't find out about her. They did what they could there. They turned their hospital or their school into a makeshift hospital where they took care of people who were wounded. 16 days later, Stalin from the Soviet Union also invaded Poland from the other end, and just like that, her whole country was gone. They did what they could to take care of people, to help. But one afternoon, Mom said there was a group of people who came by. They called themselves the Polish Underground, the partisans. And they were looking for people to join up and help fight against the enemies in the country. And some of the teachers joined up, and Mom, who was still 17 years old, she joined up too. They literally had to go and live in the forest. They dug holes in the forest floor to live in, covered themselves with tarps, had some blankets, had some ammunition and radios. But it starts getting really cold in Poland in the fall, and they didn't have enough warm supplies. And so a small group decided that they would go to a nearby town to get some more things. Mom was part of this group. She said they had to walk through the forest floor till they got to the edge of the forest where the road was. And when they got there, the older people in the group said, Irene, you stay back, mark the trail. We'll go get what we need and come back. And so she stood there all by herself. And she said, from standing where she was, she could smell a bakery at the edge of town. Smelled like hot, fresh cinnamon rolls. And she was so engulfed in this amazing smell that she didn't see or hear a truck full of Soviet soldiers coming her way. But unfortunately, the soldiers saw her. She ran as fast as she could, but several of the soldiers jumped out of the truck and chased her. They caught her, they beat her, ripped her clothes off, gang raped her, and left her for dead in the snow. I don't know how long she laid there, but eventually another truck full of Soviet soldiers came by, and this time they saw her body lying there, and they stopped, picked her up, threw her in the back of the truck, and dropped her off at a Soviet hospital. She was there at that hospital for a long time because her injuries were really severe, but eventually she got better. But unlike hospitals here, you can't just leave when you want to. She was already wanted for her involvement with the partisans, and she was not free to leave. But at one point, she found a way to escape. She got out of that hospital, she fit through a little crack in the fence, and she ran as fast as she could. She wasn't even sure where she was, but she hoped maybe a town or two away. She had an aunt that lived by there. And so this time, very carefully, she made her way through the streets. But in the evening, she came to a part of the city she said just was weird. The whole area was empty, streets empty, doors to buildings left wide open, windows broken. It was getting late and she was tired. So she found a building and went upstairs, fell asleep on a second-story floor. But in the morning, she woke up to screaming and shouting down in the street. So she went to the window and looked down. And she saw a sight no one was meant to see. Our history books refer to it as a death march. But what Mom saw was a mass of people being herded down the street like they were cattle. She could tell they were Jews Each one of them had a band on their arm with the Star of David that every Jew was forced to wear. And she said, looking at this mass of people, it would be like if the police came to your neighborhood and took every single person out of every home. There was a cross section of people from elderly all the way down to newborns, families of all ages and sizes. Mom noticed one young mother who was walking, holding a tiny child as she walked. And for no apparent reason, a German soldier came up to that woman, grabbed the child from her, threw it up in the air and shot it like it was a bird. She watched as the people continued to walk down the streets of the town, and she snuck downstairs and she followed at a distance. At the edge of town, there was a large field. Someone had dug a great big pit in that field. The Jews were forced to stand around the edge of that pit, and Mom, she found a fence and hid behind it and watched. She watched as the parents covered their children's eyes with their hands, and she watched as they were all shot. Now, my mom was raised Catholic, and she had a simple, childlike faith, but she said, watching this horrific sight, she said, I raised my eyes to the heavens and I screamed out, my God, where are you? How can you let something like this happen? She was so upset that she screamed out, I don't even believe you're there. But as she kept walking, she said she had one thought that just kept settling into her heart, and it was this, that God gives us free will to be good or bad, to help and heal, or to hurt and harm. And it's up to us to decide what we'll do. And she said it was right then and there that she made a promise, a vow, that if there was ever anything she could do to help, she would. Well, she kept walking and she finally found the right town where she knew her aunt lived, the right street, the right house. And just as she was coming up to the front door, the door opened and out came Mom's 4 sisters. Her whole family had gone there looking for her, and she had a wonderful reunion with them. But it was very short-lived because the Germans came and they took her father away. He was an architect. They wanted him to build factories for the German war front. And in war, you do what you're told or you're killed, period. And so my grandfather and grandmother and the 3 younger of my mom's sisters, they went off to be with him, but they didn't take my mom or the next oldest sister, Janina, because where they were going was next to a facility that trained German soldiers, and they didn't want the teenage girls being close to that. A couple weeks later, my mom and sister and aunt, they went to church one Sunday morning, and when they left the building, they were surrounded by German soldiers who pushed and shoved and segregated people. If you were very old, you were put aside, and if you were very young, you were put aside, but everybody who was capable of working, they were put on trucks. My mom was put on a truck with people that she didn't know, taken away to a town called Tarnopol, where she was forced to work in a munitions factory, making ammunition for the German war front. The conditions in the factories were terrible. It was freezing cold. There was barely enough to eat. And one day, a high-ranking German official, a major, he came by to make sure that production was being kept up. And when he walked by my mom's section, she ended up fainting right at his feet. When she woke up, she was in the office with this man and terrified to think that if he thought she couldn't keep up, he'd send her further away or just have her killed. And so she pleaded with him, please, sir, I haven't been well, but I am strong and I can do this job if you just give me one more chance, please. This major, who was about 60 years old, looked at this blonde, blue-eyed teenager with the last name Gut, and my mom could speak German. And he asked her, are you a German girl? But she answered truthfully, no, I'm Polish. He said, it's obvious that you can't keep up here, but I like that you're honest. You'll come with me. I'll give you another job. And so he took her to the camp that he was in charge of. It wasn't a concentration camp. It was a camp that housed German officers and secretaries and soldiers. And my mom's job would be serving meals in the diner, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And she was given one other job, and that was to oversee the laundry room. And it was when she went in the laundry room that she was introduced to the 12 Jewish people who were forced to work there. One was a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an accountant, a nurse, married couples. These were all people of means, people with homes and things that we all have in our house, things that we love, and everything they had had been taken from them and given to someone else. And now they were forced to live in the ghetto next door and take care of their captives' clothes. These people were starving, but Mom could easily sneak food from the diner, enough to feed them, in fact, enough for them to spread amongst the ghetto. But even more important than food, Mom realized that when she was serving in the diner, especially when the SS, the Nazis, were there, she could overhear plans when they were deciding on which neighborhoods to raid next, which people to take next. And she could get that information to her friends, and they could spread it through the ghetto. And hundreds of people were able to leave before their areas were raided. But one night, the major had at his table one of the heads of the Nazi party. And when Mom went up to serve him, she heard this Nazi tell the major, "Next week, don't plan on having any of you Jews here. You'll have to find substitutes." The major actually argued, "What are you talking about? I've got quotas to fill. How am I going to get my work done without my workers?" And this Nazi said, "I don't care. Hire Poles, hire Gypsies. I have my orders that by this time next week, there won't be one Jew left alive here." And Mom realized that that meant her 12 friends in the laundry room, and she had the difficult decision on if she should tell them that in 1 week, even the little bit they had would be gone. But she decided she had to tell them. And when she did, they pleaded with her, "Irene, help us. Hide us, do something." She said, I have a little room above the diner with a single bed and a wash basin. I've got no place to hide 12 people." But that night she got down on her knees and she prayed for a miracle. And in the morning she had one, because the major came to her and he said, "I'm taking a villa at the end of town. I'm going to be doing a lot of entertaining, and you're going to come and be my housekeeper." She went that day with him in his horse and carriage to the villa. And when they walked up to the front door, my mom saw a mezuzah there on the doorpost. Mom had enough Jewish friends growing up to tell her exactly what that meant. There was a Jewish family who had lived there, a wealthy Jewish family, and there was all kinds of rumors at that time that wealthy Jewish families often had a hiding place somewhere in their house, big enough to hide their whole family. And she prayed that was true. So she asked the major for a pass so she could go from the camp to the villa over the next couple of days to get things ready. And over the next couple of days, she helped all 12 of her friends escape out of the camp, down the streets of the town to the villa, down a coal chute, and into the basement, until all 12 of them were there in the basement of the German major's house. And she breathed a sigh of relief until the major came and walked through the place. "Irene, this house is filthy still. I want it scrubbed. I want it painted from top to bottom." And he made her arrive the next day with a squad of German soldiers ready to do that. She kept her friends quiet in the basement and started the soldiers upstairs. And when they were finished, she brought the soldiers from the front staircase down, took her friends from the back staircase, hid them in a tiny spot up in the attic until the house was cleaned and painted. Finally, those soldiers left and she was able to bring her friends back downstairs and breathe a sigh of relief until the major walked through the house again. "Irene, the house looks much better now. We're going to start entertaining large parties, a lot of work, but not to worry. I'm going to bring a soldier who can help you with everything. He can sleep and live in the basement." That wouldn't work. And so she pleaded with the major, "Please, Please don't bring a soldier here to be with me every day. I'd be a nervous wreck having him here. She had to explain to him what had happened to the Soviet soldiers, the rapes that she had. He said, don't be an idiot. Nothing is going to happen to you in my house. You're perfectly safe here. But she pleaded, she begged. She said, I don't need help. You'll see. I can do everything myself. I was trained by my mother. He said, Irene, we're going to have parties for 30, 40, 50 people a night. Besides cooking and cleaning, there's shopping, heavy lifting, laundry, ironing, gardening. There's no way one person can do all that. She continued to plead and beg and assure him she could until he said, enough. I'll give you one chance. The first time you embarrass me, the first time you can't keep up, my soldier comes in. So they had a really great arrangement because every morning the major would get up, have breakfast, and he would leave the villa to go to his office, and Mom would follow behind him with her house key. And as soon as he left, she would put her key on the inside of the door. That way, if he came home before he was supposed to, his key wouldn't unlock the door. He'd have to ring the doorbell, which would give her enough time to take care of everything. So every day, while he was gone, they searched that villa from top to bottom, hoping to find that hiding place. And sure enough, they did. It was down in the basement. You had to lay on the floor, but there was one small panel of wood on the wall that could be removed. And when it was, you saw a tunnel that wrapped around the whole side of the villa and ended in a small room that sat just underneath the gazebo in the side yard. A room just big enough to squeeze 12 people in. So every day the major would get up, he'd have breakfast, grab his hat, his coat, his briefcase, and head out the door. Mom would follow with her key, put it in the doorknob as soon as he left, and then she'd race to the basement door and open it up, and all 12 of her friends would come out. The men did the heavy lifting, the repair work, the women did the cooking, the cleaning, the polishing, the laundry, the ironing, and every day the major came home amazed at what a teenage girl could accomplish. That's how they lived for a very long time. Parties where the Gestapo and the Nazis dined on the food that the Jews had made earlier that day. The Jews had had to be so quiet during these times they couldn't even cough or sneeze for fear of being found out. And that's how they lived for about 2 years until 2 of the 12 in the basement, a married couple, Ida and Laser Holler. They'd been married for years and had never been able to have children. And now they found out that they were expecting a baby that would be born and cry and give them all away. His parents desperately wanted the child, but they felt like they had no choice. And my mom was given a list of supplies needed to perform an abortion. She pleaded with them, Ida, Laser, please don't do this. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I believe it's a sign that will be okay, that everything will work out. I've already seen so many innocent people murdered. Hitler's not going to have this child. Took a lot of convincing, but finally they all agreed that they would either all live together or they would all die together. And life went on. Until one day, Mom had to go into town to get some more supplies for another upcoming party. And when she was in the store, she said some German soldiers came in and yelled at everyone to get outside. She had no idea what was going on, but when she walked out of the store, she realized the whole town had been evacuated. Everyone in every building and house was now standing on either side of the sidewalks. In the middle of the street was a set of gallows that had been erected. There was a Polish Catholic family with 2 small children, and they had been caught hiding a Jewish family with a small child. You have to understand that back then in Poland, there was signs on every street corner saying death was the penalty for hiding a Jew. Death was the penalty if you got caught giving them a piece of bread. And that day in town, everybody was forced to stand and watch what that looked like. Mom said that they hung the children first and made the parents watch. And she said, I stood there with my eyes closed, but even with closed eyes, she could still hear and feel what was happening. And it was that day walking back to the villa, she said, I was like a zombie. All she could think of is, I can't tell my friends what I've seen. There's nothing they could do about it. It would just upset them. But because she was so shook up when she got back to the villa, she forgot to do what she had done every day for the last 2.5 years. She forgot to leave that key in the lock. She walked in the house, into the kitchen, put her groceries down, opened up the basement door, and let 3 of the women come up to help her with the evening meal. She said, we were standing there cooking and talking, and all of a sudden there was a noise at the kitchen door, and they turned, and there was the major, eyes bulging, chin shaking. He took one look at these women, and he turned around and he went to his office where the telephone was. Mom told her friends, get back in the basement. And she said, I ran after him and grabbed a hold of his legs to stop him. He turned around and screamed at her, how could you do this? In my own home, under my own nose, after all I've done for you. Why? She was crying and said, they're my friends. No one has the right to kill because of race or religion. These people, they've done nothing wrong. Punish me, kill me, but let them go, they're innocent. He said, turn you in? You think I can march you down to the Gestapo and tell them I didn't know I had Jews hiding in my own house? You've killed us all. I have to have time to go and think. I'm going to go to my office, and when I do, don't you go anywhere, don't you talk to anyone. As soon as he left, she ran in the kitchen, she got food and water, went down to the basement, gave it to her friends and said, get in the hiding place. If I don't come back in 3 days, it means I'm dead. You'll have to get yourself out. And she went back upstairs to wait. Finally, he came back, went into his office, sat behind his desk, and she had no choice but to go and face him. And when she did, he reached out, grabbed her by the waist, pulled her down on his lap. I've made a decision. I'm going to keep your secret before a price. You have to be mine anytime I ask, and willingly. Mom said there was no decision to be made. There was too many lives at stake. And she never told her friends what she had to do. She said their integrity would have never let her make that decision. But they did all survive. And eventually the Soviets started pushing the Germans out of Poland, and the whole war front began to collapse. The major came to Mom at one point and said, I have orders to move my unit. Are you coming with me? She said, I want to find my family. It had been almost 5 years. She had no idea if her parents and sisters were even alive. And so as he started making preparations to move out, Mom contacted her friends, the partisans who were still out there in the forest, and said, make room. I'm bringing you 12 people and one very pregnant woman. She took her friends by 2 in the bottom of the major's wagon, laid them down, covered them with blankets and shovels and food, and rode from the villa out to the forest where the partisans were, back and forth, until they were all there. She stayed with them that last trip. And 6 days later, a little baby boy was born out there in those woods in freedom. Ida and Laser named their son Roman Haller. Mom said holding baby Roman was her payment in full for everything she'd gone through. Now they wanted her to continue to stay there in the forest, but she wanted to find her family, and she left. A lot of things happened during that time, but eventually Mom was captured, this time by the Soviets. After all, she'd been the mistress of a high-ranking German official, and the Soviets accused her of being a spy. She was put in a concentration camp and told she'd be sent to Siberia for the rest of her life. And she truly thought her life was over. After she'd been sitting there for 2 or 3 months, an amazing thing happened. You see, the Soviets, they hired men on a daily or weekly basis to deliver food to the prisoners. And oftentimes they hired Jewish men. One time, one of the Jewish men they hired happened to be one of the men she'd hid in the basement of the major's house. And when he came that night, he saw her out there in the camp and he called out, "Irene, what are you doing here?" She was so overwhelmed at seeing a familiar, friendly face that she said, "I couldn't say a word." He came back later that night with friends, and they smuggled her out of that camp. They gave her false identity papers. They dyed her blonde hair black. She wasn't going to be Irena Gut, Polish Catholic. Now she was Sonia Sofrestein, a Jewish refugee. So that's her there in her black hair. Mom was put in a displaced persons camp and left there to try and put her life back together. She found out that her father had been shot and killed by the Germans for refusing to move off the sidewalk when he was told. My mother's mother had a stroke and didn't survive, but she couldn't find out anything about her 4 little sisters and assumed that they had not survived either. As the war was ending, there was a group of men from the United Nations who came to the camps to do interviews of the people who survived, and there was an American delegate who came to the camp Mom was at. He could speak English and French, and he ended up interviewing my mom, who could speak Polish, Russian, German, and quite a bit of Yiddish. And through an interpreter, she told him her story. And he said, "The United States of America would be very honored to have you come." She hoped to stay in Poland. She hoped to find her sisters, but she was afraid if any survived. Now she was wanted by the Germans and the Soviets. She was afraid she'd bring trouble to them if they were still alive. And so in 1949, she came on a cargo ship to the United States. On that ship, when she got into the Ellis Island harbor, isn't she so pretty? She stood on the bow of that boat and put a "do not disturb" sign over all of her memories. She said, "I'm in a new country. I have a fresh start, a brand new beginning, and I will never again think about the things that have gone through my life. Starts fresh here." But she came into the United States with no money, no friends, and not one word of English, but she could speak Yiddish. And she was able to make a lot of great Jewish friends who helped her find a little apartment, to get a job in the garment district. It took my mom 5 years, but she became a United States citizen. And she had been saving up to treat herself to a very special luncheon in Manhattan for the occasion. She was sitting in this restaurant. It was quite crowded. There was only one empty chair close by to her. And as she was eating, a gentleman sat down and asked her, "Do you mind if I sit here?" And then he looked at her. "I know you," he said. He was the UN delegate who'd interviewed her in the displaced persons camp, the very man who'd invited her to the United States. Well, he asked that pretty young blonde out to dinner that night, and the next night, and 6 weeks later, they were married. My parents moved from the East Coast out to Southern California, where I was born. And Mom, she became an interior decorator. She was really, really good too. She could sell ice to Eskimos. And until I was 14 years old, that is all I knew about my mom, was that she was beautiful, talented, and elegant. I never once heard any of these stories. True to her word, she had that "do not disturb" sign up. It wasn't until we were having dinner one night and the telephone rang and Mom got up to answer it. And on the other line was a college student who was doing a survey for a report in school, and his topic, the Holocaust never happened. It's just propaganda drummed up by the Jews, so we all feel sorry for them. And he was calling random people to find out what they thought. He found out what she thought. And so did I that night. I remember at one point tuning into her conversation and looking at my dad saying, "What in the world is she talking about?" He was the only person in this country who knew her story. and he was enough of a gentleman to wait till she was ready to share it. What I remember most was after she hung up, tears streaming down her face from bringing up these memories, and her looking at us and saying, all these years that I've kept silent, I've allowed evil. I've allowed the enemy to win. Because when we don't stand up and talk about what hate does, history will continue to repeat itself. And she said, I am willing from now on to go anywhere to talk to anyone so that these things never happen again. And boy, I want to tell you, that's exactly what she did. It didn't take very long until she was tromping through the country sharing her story. I like to stop right here and give you the title of the talk. Most people give you the title at the beginning. I like to do it now. And I have to warn you that it's an odd title for a Holocaust talk. But the title is Love. Weird, huh? It's not when you think about it. Because for these things to never happen again, love is exactly what's required. And I'm not talking Valentine kind of love that's soft and squishy and full of chocolate. I'm talking love with skin on, love that hurts, love that's messy, but love that changes lives. It makes a difference. And as my mom's daughter, I got to tell you, I believe this because I've seen it firsthand. When you're willing to love, the kind of love that takes work, that's hard, your life goes from this size to endless, the possibilities that happen. In 1982, my mom received a phone call from a young man named Roman Holler. You remember who he was? He was the baby that was born in the woods all those years back. Well, he wasn't a baby anymore. He was a grown married man whose son was about ready to be bar mitzvahed. And he looked all over the world for my mom so that she could go to Israel and be a part of that ceremony. That was an honor and a joy of her life to be able to meet up with Roman. She found out something amazing when she talked to him too. And that's this, that after the war, Roman's parents, Ida and Lazer Holler, heard that the major literally was thrown out of his house. He had gone back after the war to his wife, but his wife had heard that he'd had an affair with his young Polish housekeeper. She wanted nothing to do with him. And so he went to friends in the town, people he'd known his whole life, but there was rumors going around about the major that he'd become a Jew sympathizer. There was big time fear associated with that. So nobody let this man, now in his 70s, into their home. He was literally forced to live on the streets. And so when Ida and Lazer Holler heard about that, they put baby Roman in the car. They drove to that town. They hunted the streets and looked at the faces until they found him. And then they put him in the car and took him home. And Roman grew up calling him Zeta until the day he died. For those of you who don't know what Zeta means, it's grandfather. Can I add another powerful word to love? And that's forgiveness. If you want to have power greater than any army, any weapon, if you can put those two things together, love and forgiveness, you have strength to soften the hardest of hearts and open the most closed minds. It changes things. I've seen it myself. In 1984, my mom was speaking to a large audience in Los Angeles. And afterwards, there was a couple right in the front row who came up and they said, Irene, we're going to Poland. We'd love to try and help you find your sisters. Mom says, it's been 40 years. I've looked. I can't find them. Now, Poland was still a communist country, but she had checked the best she could, even though she was wanted still by the Russians and the Germans. She said, I'm afraid my sisters are all gone, but she gave their names. There's Janina, Maria, Bronya, Wadja Gut. This couple, they went to Poland, and when they were there, they were diligent. They checked with the consulates and the embassies and with every local Catholic church they could find and came up with nothing. On the last day, in a taxi cab on the way to the airport to fly back to the States, they asked the driver if he could stop at a little corner store to get snacks, because it's a long plane ride home. They got out, they got their items, they went up to the shopkeeper, and they thought, let's ask one more time. And they pulled that list of names out and said, do you know these women, Janina, Maria, Bronya, Wajagut? He said, I never heard of them. But there was a woman who'd been shopping in the back of the store. She heard them. She came running up the aisle, grabbed the list out of their hands and pointed at one of the names and said, this one is me. And these others, they're my sisters. So this couple was able to give my Aunt Bronya my mom's address. And 10 days later, mom got, well, she called it a telegram from heaven, a letter from all 4 of her sisters saying, we found you and we can't wait to see you. So after 40 years, we were able to get my mom a plane ticket to Warsaw. She was so excited going that day to the airport. I think she could have flown there herself. She was able to get out of that plane and be reunited with her 4 sisters. They were all able to, over the years, come out to Southern California and spend time with her. So I got to meet them all. They were all quite characters, that's for sure. This picture here is the very last visit. My mom passed away shortly after that, and they all passed away within 2 years after her going. So she was able to go to Poland several times. Pretty cool. So in closing, the bottom line is that one person can make a difference. In her case, we're talking a young teenage girl that didn't even have the benefit of living at home with their parents and was able to do such incredible things. You know, hopefully none of us are put in a position like that. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but every single day, we have an opportunity to make a difference in someone's life, to be kind, to be helpful, to stand up for what's right, to speak up against what's wrong. It's what we're here for. One person can make a difference. I appreciate you listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Jeannie, thank you so much for sharing this powerful story. It's just an inspiration and just such a remarkable feat of bravery, what your mom did. There's lots of questions from the audience, so I'm going to pick a few of them and read them to you. One of them comes from Robert, and he said, did your mom ever learn what happened to the 12 Jews who were saved, other than the ones that you mentioned?
She had some knowledge because it took 40 years for her to start talking about it, and she was the youngest in the group. Several of them passed away. They were all able to continue on with their families and their lives, and as far as I know, pass away from, you know, in an older age rather than, but anyway, they all were able to survive. While we were on Broadway, my mom's story was a Broadway play in 2008-9. We actually had grandchildren from some of the people that she had saved in the basement who had heard about the story and came, and it was amazing, you know, to meet them and see how the generations were able to continue on because of one person's decision.
There's another question here that comes from Susan, who's curious to hear about what happened to your mom's sisters while they were separated.
It's a good story. She wanted to find that out too. When her parents were killed, basically, or died, they were kind of shifted off to various relatives. You know, they were younger, and so their school years were completely disrupted, and they grew up very poor. They always stayed close together. You know, communism, they were put in like these cement apartment kind of things where they shared a community garden and took care of themselves. But, you know, their health wasn't great. It was so surprising to meet them because my mom was the oldest. But when I met the other ones, they looked so much older than her, probably because of the food, the vitamins, the cosmetics, all the things that we have versus them. Yeah, but you know, they were able to stay close, but they truly did not think that she had survived. So it was quite a surprise for them.
I want to share with you just a couple of the comments that are coming in. One comes from Clarice, and she writes, I knew your mom in the early 80s. She was wonderful. She is a true saint, and I say this sincerely.
Thanks.
And another comment from Helen says, I'm sitting here crying and so very grateful to have heard this deep love that permeates through your family. Thank you so much. So another question comes from Martin, and he's curious if you have been to Poland and what that experience was like for you.
I was in Poland 3 times. The first time I was taken by the Polish embassy in New York City as an ambassador to Polish-Jewish relations, which was an interesting topic for me. I got a wonderful tour of the country and a look at the Polish people, and actually very surprised at still their lack of understanding and teaching about the Holocaust in the times. You know, I get a lot of questions about anti-Semitism from the Poles and things like that. And what shocked me was during communism, there was not allowed any teaching about what happened then to the Jews or anything else. You were not allowed to talk about it. And so literally generation of kids grew up only knowing what happened to their own families and to the hardship that they suffered. And, you know, so thankfully now in some of the universities are actually having some teaching and things about what actually happened and some of the things that were done, but there's a whole lot of work needs to be done. I have gone back with a group from Candles Museum in Indiana, where we take students to come and, you know, we start off, we go through the camps and we go with an actual survivor, one of Mengele's twins, who just recently passed away, unfortunately. But so I have gone back again. It's an interesting country. So.
Thanks, Jeannie. You were telling me a little bit about how complicated the major was. And I'm wondering if you can maybe tell the audience a little bit more about him and how he was recognized later in life, and even recently, how this story continues.
Be glad to. While my mom was alive, she was contacted by the Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel, about inducting Major Edward Rugemer as a righteous Gentile, because none of the people in the basement that my mom hid actually knew the consequences that she had to face in order for them to stay there. And so they truly thought it was the goodness of his heart. My mom explained in a letter that even though he did allow them to stay alive, his kindness came with a big price tag for her. So after my mom passed away, I got another letter from the Yad Vashem a good 15 years later, telling me again that he was being considered to be a righteous Gentile. And I wrote back to him and I said, I thought this was already cleared up. But they explained to me that there was a factory in the town where they lived that had the employees were all Jewish, and he was in charge of it. And as things were winding down and Hitler was really trying to speed up the liquidation of all the Jews, he earmarked this factory and the people to go to the concentration camps. And Major Edward Rugemer did a whole lot of steps to keep that from happening. He did not tell my mom that, as far as I know. She never ever heard that. She never said anything to me. But there's testimony from these people who actively say that he saved their lives. And what I have come up with, and I believe with my whole heart, is that once he found out that there were women down in the basement, he never asked my mom who else was there. He only saw those 3 women. And he used to allow, when they had no parties or anything going on, he used to allow my mom to bring them up. They would have dinner together. They played the piano, they played games, they sang. And I think over the year or so that this happened, he realized that these were human beings that had value and worth, and they became people to him, not something to exterminate. And I honestly think that that's the key. You know, so many people go, I don't know what to do with all this hate and this anger that's in the world. And if we could just open our hearts up and give our time and be willing to listen and to see what we have in common rather than argue about what we don't, you know, obviously it changed this man. And, you know, he's responsible for saving people himself. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I still find him complicated, though.
It is complicated, but you know, forgiveness always is. It's never, I've learned it's never equal. We, as you said, we've had 60 kids in our house, and I could write a book about the things that have happened and the stealing that has gone on and the lying. And, you know, it's a learning process for some and things, but there's always restoration and hope if you can get to the point where there's communication and understanding and stuff. But as long as you hold on to, you know, those offenses, and they can be real offenses, it makes it difficult. So, you know, we've learned the hard way that forgiveness is a real power that we hold, that we can give. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite a message. And you and your mom have really, I feel like, been role models and have exemplified that. I mean, it's incredible for the rest of us who are listening and learning from you and your mom's story. Can your mom, here's one final question, Jeannie. Your mom was recognized as righteous among the nations. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Well, it's quite an honor. It is given to non-Jewish people who helped during the war, and it's a specific kind of help. It has to be one that you receive no compensation or reward for. You know, you sacrificed the possibility of death even to help. So it was an honor for her. Roman actually was there. He's not shown in this picture, but there's a rabbi with that little cap on, and he's from Fullerton, California. He's the one who actually heard my mom speak for the very first time, and he was instrumental in getting her story out and getting people to want to hear it and getting a hold of the Yad Vashem. So yeah, we're very grateful for him, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's been so much written about her and her story. Can you tell us again the name of the musical that was based on?
It was a drama. It was not a musical. It was called Irena's Vow, and Tova Felch played my mom. And I'm going to tell you, she was amazing. She's dark-skinned and muscular and all the things my mother wasn't, but what an actress. When she'd get her wig on and her blue contacts and her little voice, it was like seeing her, my mom, every night, you know, for all those times. So it was incredible. We are currently working on a production for Netflix or Amazon. We got like a 5 or 6 episode series that we're putting together, and God willing, that could happen. So we'll see.
Fantastic. We will look for that. I hope to see that. That would be wonderful.
It would be. It'd be a great way to get the message out. And honestly, you know, the message that one person can make a difference is needed to be heard now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. What's the name of the Netflix show so we can look?
I don't know. We haven't come up with that. There's so many steps to it, but we've got pilots and we've got a lot of interest in stuff. So I don't know what the name will be. Right now they're calling it In My Hands. So we'll see. Okay.
We'll keep an eye out for it. Jeannie, it is always such an honor to speak with you and to have you as part of the Holocaust Center's programming. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It was an honor to be asked. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our participants for joining us for today's program. It's been recorded, so you can find it on our website starting tomorrow if you want to go back and watch it or share it with others. It's there along with all of our other past Lunch and Learn programs. The views, information, or opinions expressed in this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the Holocaust Center for Humanity. I want to thank Michelle Quinones for providing closed captioning for us today. And I want to give a special thank you to Richard Green, our Museum and Technology Director, who's running the technical side of this show. Also, a huge thank you to our Executive Director, Dee Simon, and our entire team, Nicole Bella, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Julia Thompson, Paul Regelbrug, Sydney Draytel, Ellie Selesky, Amanda Davis, Rick Brewer, Katie Lawrence, and Morgan Romero. Please join us next week to hear from Holocaust survivor Henry Haas. With few options, Henry and his family escaped from Germany, and their journey lasted almost a year until they finally arrived in Shanghai, China, the only port that would accept them. We hope you can join us for this firsthand account next week, Tuesday at noon. Thank you so much for joining us today, and this concludes our program.